Chapter 36 of Ruth. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Ruth by Elizabeth Cleghorn Gaskell. Chapter 36. Read by Cynthia Lyons. The End. A stupor of grief succeeded to Leonard's passionate cries. He became so much depressed, physically as well as mentally, before the end of the day, that Mr. Davis was seriously alarmed for the consequences. He hailed with gladness a proposal made by the Farquhars that the boy should be removed to their house, and placed under the fond care of his mother's friend, who sent her own child to Abermouth the better to devote herself to Leonard. When they told him of this arrangement, he at first refused to go and leave her; but when Mr. Benson said, "She would have wished it, Leonard; do it for her sake," he went away very quietly, not speaking a word, after Mr. Benson had made the voluntary promise that he should see her once again. He neither spoke nor cried for many hours, and all Jemima's delicate wiles were called forth before his heavy heart could find the relief of tears. And then he was so weak, and his pulse so low, that all who loved him feared for his life. Anxiety about him made a sad distraction from the sorrow for the dead. The three old people, who now formed the household in the chapel house, went about slowly and dreamily, each with a dull wonder at their hearts why they, the infirm and worn out, were left, while she was taken in her lovely prime. The third day after Ruth's death, a gentleman came to the door and asked to speak to Mr. Benson. He was very much wrapped up in furs and cloaks, and the upper exposed part of his face was sunk and hollow, like that of one but partially recovered from illness. Mr. and Miss Benson were at Mr. Farquhar's, gone to see Leonard, and poor old Sally had been having a hearty cry over the kitchen fire before answering the door knock. Her heart was tenderly inclined, just then, towards any one who had the aspect of suffering. So, although her master was out, and she was usually chary of admitting strangers, she proposed to Mr. Donne, for it was he, that he should come in and await Mr. Benson's return in the study. He was glad enough to avail himself of her offer, for he was feeble and nervous, and come on a piece of business which he exceedingly disliked, and about which he felt very awkward. The fire was nearly, if not quite, out, nor did Sally's vigorous blows do much good, although she left the room with an assurance that it would soon burn up. He leant against the chimney-piece, thinking over events, and with a sensation of discomfort, both external and internal, growing and gathering upon him. He almost wondered whether the proposal he meant to make with regard to Leonard could not be better arranged by letter than by an interview. He became very shivery and impatient of the state of indecision to which his bodily weakness had reduced him. Sally opened the door and came in. "Would you like to walk upstairs, sir?" asked she in a trembling voice, for she had learnt who the visitor was from the driver of the fly, who had run up to the house to inquire what was detaining the gentleman that he had brought from the Queen's Hotel; and, knowing that Ruth had caught the fatal fever from her attendance on Mr. Donne, Sally imagined that it was but a piece of sad civility to invite him upstairs to see the poor dead body, which she had laid out and decked for the grave, with such fond care that she had grown strangely proud of its marble beauty. Mr. Donne was glad enough of any proposal of a change from the cold and comfortless room where he had thought uneasy, remorseful thoughts. He fancied that a change of place would banish the train of reflection that was troubling him; but the change he anticipated was to a well-warmed, cheerful sitting-room, with signs of life, and a bright fire therein, and he was on the last flight of stairs, at the door of the room where Ruth lay, before he understood whither Sally was conducting him. He shrank back for an instant, and then a strange sting of curiosity impelled him on. He stood in the humble, low-roofed attic, the window open, and the tops of the distant snow-covered hills filling up the whiteness of the general aspect. He muffled himself up in his cloak, and shuddered, while Sally reverently drew down the sheet, and showed the beautiful, calm, still face, on which the last rapturous smile still lingered, giving an ineffable look of bright serenity. Her arms were crossed over her breast. The wimple-like cap marked the perfect oval of her face, while two braids of the waving auburn hair peeped out of the narrow border, and lay on the delicate cheeks. He was awed into admiration by the wonderful beauty of that dead woman. "How beautiful she is!" said he, beneath his breath. "Do all dead people look so peaceful, so happy?" "Not all," replied Sally, crying. "Few have been as good and as gentle as she was in their lives." She quite shook with her sobbing. Mr Donne was disturbed by her distress. "Come, my good woman, we must all die." He did not know what to say, and was becoming infected by her sorrow. "I am sure you loved her very much, and were very kind to her in her lifetime. You must take this from me to buy yourself some remembrance of her." He had pulled out a sovereign, and really had a kindly desire to console her and reward her in offering it to her. But she took her apron from her eyes as soon as she became aware of what he was doing, and still holding it midway in her hands, she looked at him indignantly before she burst out: "And who are you, that think to pay for my kindness to her by money? And I was not kind to you, my darling," said she, passionately addressing the motionless, serene body. "I was not kind to you. I frabbed you, and plagued you from the first, my lamb. I came and cut off your pretty locks in this very room. I did. And you said never an angry word to me; no, not then, nor many a time after, when I was very sharp and cross to you. No, I was never kind to you, and I do not think the world was kind to you, my darling. But you are gone where the angels are very tender to such as you. You are, my poor wench." She bent down and kissed the lips, from whose marble, unyielding touch Mr Donne recoiled, even in thought. Just then Mr Benson entered the room. He had returned home before his sister, and came upstairs in search of Sally, to whom he wanted to speak on some subject relating to the funeral. He bowed in recognition of Mr Donne, whom he knew as the member for the town, and whose presence impressed him painfully, as his illness had been the proximate cause of Ruth's death. But he tried to check this feeling, as it was no fault of Mr Donne's. Sally stole out of the room to cry at leisure in her kitchen. "I must apologise for being here," said Mr Donne. "I was hardly conscious where your servant was leading me to, when she expressed her wish that I should walk upstairs." "It is a very common idea in this town, that it is a gratification to be asked to take a last look at the dead," replied Mr Benson. "And in this case I am glad to have seen her once more," said Mr Donne. "Poor Ruth!" Mr Benson glanced up at him at the last word. How did he know her name? To him she had only been Mrs Denbigh. But Mr Donne had no idea that he was talking to one unaware of the connexion that had formerly existed between them; and though he would have preferred carrying on the conversation in a warmer room, yet, as Mr Benson was still gazing at her with sad lingering love, he went on: "I did not recognise her when she came to nurse me. I believe I was delirious. My servant, who had known her long ago in Fordham,